I was just an ordinary young man, buried in bills and stuck in a temporary job. Every time I talked about starting my own business, my coworkers would laugh as if I'd said I was going to become an astronaut. Running your own business is nothing but a headache, they'd say. But you know what? The worst headache was imagining spending my whole life in that place. That's when I realized either I change now or I get used to what I don't want. And, well, I'm not the kind of person who settles for less. What happened next? Well, let me tell you. My name is Lucas, I'm 23 years old, and like many people my age, I find myself trapped in a cycle of bills to pay, longing for freedom, and that nagging feeling that life could be so much different. Currently, I work a temporary job, one of those jobs that seem never-ending but don't really lead anywhere. Every time I mention the idea of starting my own business, my coworkers laugh. It's the kind of laugh that's a mix of sarcasm and condescension, as if I'd suggested inventing a time machine or opening a unicorn zoo. They say things like, "Lucas, trust me, having your own business is nothing but headaches," or "Forget about it, man. Just earn your paycheck and go home in peace." But the truth is, I wasn't at peace. There was something inside me that wouldn't stop whispering about how life could be different. It was like a small flame burning deep in my chest, urging me not to settle. The problem was that this flame came with something else, fear. Fear of failure. Fear of taking the wrong step. Fear of disappointing my family, who depended on the little I earned. It's funny how fear can be the biggest brake on a person's life. It doesn't paralyze you all at once, it slowly chains you, like an invisible shackle. But there was one night I'll never forget. It had been an especially tough day at work. My boss was in a bad mood, my coworkers wouldn't stop complaining about life, and to top it off, when I got home, another overdue bill was waiting for me. I sat on the couch in my small living room, the dim light of the lamp barely illuminating the papers in my hands. In that moment, something inside me shifted. It was as if the flame burned brighter. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to start. It was either that or spend the rest of my life settling. I grabbed an old notebook, the same one I used to jot down random ideas that popped into my head, and started writing how to leave this job and build something of my own. I didn't have answers, only questions. But for the first time, I felt like I was taking a small step forward. Looking at that notebook, part of me wondered, could it really be possible? And, more importantly, would I have the courage to see it through? The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling, as if I had crossed an invisible line overnight. The notebook was still there, open, with a few scribbled ideas. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with those ideas, but something inside me told me I couldn't let them go to waste. When I got to work, my coworkers were there, as always, complaining about the boss, the delays, and, of course, joking about the idea of having your own business. The boss, with his irritating voice and constant demands, came into the room and assigned me yet another task, as if it were just a simple order. I looked at him, and instead of automatically replying like I always did, I started questioning myself. What would my life look like if I kept saying yes to tasks that meant nothing to me? Was this what I wanted? A never-ending routine with no real purpose? At lunchtime, I went to the same diner as always, where the staff already knew me by name. But that day, something felt different. While eating, I pulled out my phone and started looking up stories about entrepreneurs and how people started their businesses from scratch. With every article I read, something lit up inside me. I began to realize it wasn't as impossible as I'd imagined. It was more about focus and having the courage to take the first step. I knew I needed something more concrete, something that would move me from being a dreamer to actually taking action. The idea forming in my mind was simple, but felt like a big challenge. Start with what little I had, without waiting for the perfect moment. I didn't have much money or many resources, but for some reason, that day I was ready to try. The rest of the afternoon at work dragged on, but my mind was racing. The fear was still there, but it wasn't as strong as before. More and more, I could see myself outside those walls, building something of my own, something that truly had meaning. When the clock struck the end of the workday, everyone started leaving, talking about their plans for the evening. I, on the other hand, went straight home. I had an idea and needed to get it down on paper. That night, once again, I sat at my desk, grabbed the notebook, and started planning. It was a simple plan, but it was the first step. I didn't know if it was the right move, but I knew that if I didn't start, I'd never find out. As I wrote, something kept bothering me. I was excited but also anxious. The fear was still there, whispering in the back of my mind, what if you fail? I took a deep breath and wrote my first goal, take the first step to build my business. It wasn't anything grand, but it was enough to start. From that moment on, I knew there was no turning back. The flame inside me was burning, and I wasn't going to let it go out. The first step had been taken, but the truth was that, at that moment, I was more lost than ever. I knew I wanted to start my own business, but I had no idea where to begin. Everything felt so far away, so complicated. I had more questions than answers. I spent the whole night awake, browsing websites, watching videos, and reading inspiring stories of people who had started from nothing. Each story seemed to push me forward, giving me more courage, but the doubt still lingered. Was I really ready for this? Did I have what it took to turn my dream into reality? The next day, I went to work, but my mind was elsewhere. The usual conversations with coworkers about their day-to-day lives, weekend plans, and how everything was fine as it was echoed in my mind like a constant reminder that I was on a different path. What bothered me most was seeing how everyone seemed so content, as if life were an endless wait for the weekend, a routine of surviving work, paying bills, and waiting for vacation. When the workday ended, I decided to stop by a small shop I often passed on my way home. It was a modest place, but its simple yet welcoming facade always caught my attention. I went inside and was greeted by a middle-aged man with a curious yet kind look. He seemed to be the owner, and something about him made me think he knew more than I did about the ups and downs of running a business. I decided to approach him and strike up a conversation. I was nervous and didn't know how to start, but I began asking about how he had started his business. He smiled, and instead of giving me a direct answer, he asked me a question. Do you know what the hardest part of having your own business is? I stayed silent for a moment. Then he continued, it's that the fear never goes away. The fear of failing, the fear of the unknown. But do you know what's most interesting? Fear doesn't stop you, it teaches you to be braver, to be more attentive. Those words echoed in my head. Until that moment, I had been so consumed by the fear of failure that I had forgotten to focus on what truly mattered, learning. I didn't need to have all the answers right away. I just needed to take another step and keep moving forward. Back home, my heart racing, I started planning again, this time with a clearer focus. I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew that if I didn't try, I'd never find out. I had to face my fears and learn from them, and that's exactly what I began to do. The most interesting thing, though, was realizing that fear, far from being an obstacle, was actually a sign that I was on the right track. There was no way to achieve success without first confronting my own fears. After that conversation at the store, something shifted inside me. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I knew I had to act. The fear of failure was still there, but now it felt like a constant companion, something I needed to learn to live with. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. But I was determined to try. The next day, after work, I went home and sat in front of my notebook. I had a clearer idea of what I wanted to do, but at the same time, a cloud of doubt hung over me. How do I start? What do I need to take that first step? I decided to follow the advice from some of the articles I had read, start small. I didn't need a big initial investment. I had some basic knowledge of social media and digital marketing, and I thought it might be a good idea to sell something simple online, something I could sell without requiring a large inventory or upfront investment. That's when a simple idea struck me, selling sustainable products. I was living in a neighborhood where people cared about the environment, and I noticed a growing demand for sustainable and eco-friendly products like reusable bottles and cotton bags. I had no idea how to go about it, but I decided to start researching suppliers and platforms where I could sell. In the days that followed, I was consumed with planning and execution. The first major challenge appeared right away: finding reliable suppliers. I was browsing supplier websites when, in a moment of distraction, I almost fell for a scam. A supplier offered extremely low prices, with photos of beautiful products, but something didn't feel right. When I contacted them, the response was vague, and the communication seemed off. I nearly bought the stock without digging deeper, but something made me hesitate. I learned an important lesson immediately: not everything that glitters is gold. Frustration took over me. I was starting to realize that, as an entrepreneur, I'd have to deal with many ups and downs. The journey wasn't going to be easy. But at the same time, that experience taught me something valuable: don't trust everything that seems too good to be true. I needed to be more cautious, more observant. After that incident, I began researching the market more thoroughly. I looked for suppliers with good reviews and references. Gradually, I started building a network of contacts and piecing together what I needed to launch my small business. It wasn't anything grand yet, but I was beginning to understand how the game worked. One of the hardest things was adjusting my expectations. I had been hoping for quick results, expecting sales to come pouring in immediately. But I soon realized that nothing happens overnight. I had to learn to deal with the frustration of not seeing instant results. With every sale I made, I felt a small taste of victory, but at the same time, I wondered, will this be enough? I was just at the beginning, but the challenges were preparing me for something bigger. What I didn't know was that this search for my first real customer would be just the start of a series of lessons to come. After a few weeks of trial and error, I was beginning to understand what it really meant to be an entrepreneur. Nothing came easy, and the victories were small but incredibly significant to me. Every time I made a sale, my heart would fill with excitement, but reality would soon catch up with me. The work never stopped. I had to be the salesperson, the marketer, the administrator, all at once. That feeling of being in control of everything was exhilarating, but it also left me exhausted. Every night spent researching or creating ads to promote my products made me question whether I was truly on the right path. I wasn't in the same place as before, but I couldn't tell if I was closer to success or just running in circles. There were days when no sales came in. The frustration felt overwhelming, but every time I fell, I picked myself back up. I couldn't afford to give up, not after everything I had already invested, not just financially but emotionally. I had to keep moving forward. But there was one thing I didn't expect. On one of the toughest days, I received a message from a dissatisfied customer. He had purchased one of my products, but for some reason, it didn't meet his expectations. His feedback was blunt and cutting. This wasn't worth what I paid. It was a hard blow. I was trying to do things the right way, but that didn't mean everything would turn out perfectly. I spent hours trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. A voice in my head kept telling me I wasn't good enough, that maybe my dream of becoming a successful entrepreneur was just a foolish idea. But I couldn't let that defeat me. I took a deep breath, reflected on the mistake, and decided to learn from it. I called the customer, apologized, and offered a solution. Despite his initial frustration, he was impressed by my attitude and accepted the exchange proposal. The relief I felt was immense. That day, I learned an important lesson: entrepreneurship wasn't about achieving immediate success, but about how you handled failure. Every mistake was an opportunity to learn, and that's what truly mattered. At my day job, the routine remained the same. My coworkers still laughed at my ideas, always saying I was just wasting my time. And sometimes, I caught myself questioning if I was really on the right path. But something inside me wouldn't let me give up. I began to see failures as part of the process, not as insurmountable obstacles. It was a long road, but each step brought me closer to the person I wanted to become. Meanwhile, life carried on, and time seemed to fly by. I was on an emotional roller coaster, but deep down, I knew I couldn't turn back. I didn't want to be where I was anymore, doing what I was doing. I wanted more. I wanted freedom. And that desire was what drove me every single day, despite all the challenges. I was beginning to understand that the path of entrepreneurship wasn't a straight line. It was a series of detours, curves, and even unexpected stops. Everything I thought I knew was being challenged with each new obstacle. The business I had started with so much enthusiasm now felt like a heavy burden. Every time I tried to improve one aspect of it, something new would come up. It was like patching holes in a leaking boat. Fix one, and another would appear. It was during this moment, when I was on the verge of succumbing to exhaustion and frustration, that I realized something important. What I needed wasn't more hard work, it was smarter work. I had to stop fighting against the tide and start thinking differently. If I kept walking the same path without pausing to reflect, nothing would ever change. The key was reinvention. I couldn't keep trying to be something I wasn't. I was exhausting myself by trying to please everyone and solve every problem alone. So, I decided to take a step back and view the situation from a new perspective. Instead of following my old approach, I began to rethink my processes more strategically. That's when I had a wild idea. What if I started doing something no one else was doing? Something unique? Something that truly resonated with the audience I was trying to reach but had overlooked until now? I had been so focused on following the traditional path that I hadn't thought about innovating. What I hadn't realized was that innovation wasn't about selling more products, it was about selling them differently. I started asking myself transformative questions, small but impactful. What does my customer really want? What am I offering that stands out from the rest? And, most importantly, am I doing this for my business or for others? The answer was clear. I had been so obsessed with growing quickly that I had lost sight of why I started in the first place. I wanted financial freedom, but I was getting lost in the rush. That's when I decided to shift my strategy. Instead of trying to sell to everyone, I would focus on a very specific niche. I knew that a loyal, engaged audience would be far more valuable in the long run than trying to please everyone. I decided to invest more in my own content, creating a brand that truly connected with people and conveyed a message of sustainability, well-being, and a brighter future. I wasn't just building an online store, I was building a mission. The first step was revamping my website. I didn't know much about design, but I dove headfirst into tutorials and tips. Within a week, I managed to create something simple yet capable of conveying the message I wanted to share. I focused on improving the customer experience, creating a more pleasant, easy-to-navigate space that exuded authenticity. Additionally, I began partnering with small influencers who shared my values. The goal wasn't just to sell, but to build a community. That's when things started to change. Slowly, sales began to pick up again, but the greatest reward wasn't the money, it was the messages I received from satisfied customers, people who felt genuinely connected to my brand. I was beginning to understand that success didn't come from how I presented myself to the world, but from how I connected with it. The true value lay in the relationships I was building. But the journey wasn't over. I still had so much to learn and knew that greater challenges were yet to come. The hardest part, however, wouldn't be the financial difficulties or lack of sales. It would be the challenge that lay ahead, how to sustain this growth without losing my essence. I was beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. After months of trial and error, I finally had something that seemed to work. Sales were starting to pick up, and, more importantly, I felt like I was in control of my journey. I was no longer trying to fit into molds that weren't meant for me. I was creating my own path, something genuine that somehow touched people. It was at this point, when I was feeling most confident, that the biggest challenge of all emerged, one I was completely unprepared to face, a major financial blow. One of the main payment platforms I worked with suffered a cyber attack, and my funds were frozen. No matter how hard I tried to reach support, the issue persisted. Sales kept coming in, but I couldn't access the money. I was literally selling, but I couldn't touch the income that was being generated. It felt like a nightmare. At first, I thought it was a temporary issue, a simple system error, but the reality proved much harsher. Weeks went by, and my bank balance grew thinner and thinner. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. Every customer who made a purchase, every order I received, felt like a victory, but at the same time, it pushed me closer to the edge. Sales continued to pile up, but the funds became increasingly out of reach. The words of my former colleagues echoed in my mind: running your own business is nothing but headaches. I didn't know if that was true, but at that moment, it felt like they were right. Everything I had built with so much effort and sacrifice was being threatened by something completely beyond my control. I felt powerless. But it wasn't just the financial aspect weighing on me. I began to question whether all my effort was worth it. There were moments when I wanted to just give up. The work was already consuming so much of me, and the difficulties seemed to multiply. Each passing day left my mind more saturated with worries. Was I making the right choices? Would this path truly lead to the freedom I had dreamed of, or was it just another trap, another phase of endless struggle? I remember the exact moment I decided I wouldn't give in. What hurt me the most wasn't the financial loss, but the idea that all the work I had done so far could be for nothing. I had to keep going, not just for myself, but for the journey I had started. I couldn't fail now. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to find a solution. That's when, finally, a small glimmer of hope appeared. A contact from a supplier I had worked with in the past messaged me, saying he had resolved a similar issue with the same payment platform. I was skeptical, but desperate. I agreed to speak with him. He gave me tips on how to speed up the recovery process and how to escalate the issue directly with the platform to push for quicker action. I didn't know if it would work, but it was the only chance I had. During that period of uncertainty, I learned a fundamental lesson: the true test of an entrepreneur isn't in the victories, but in how they handle setbacks. I had to be resilient, to hold on to my ability to find solutions even when none seemed apparent. I had to swallow my pride and ask for help. I had to understand that no problem is too big when you have the right focus and determination. Finally, after weeks of anxiety and uncertainty, access to the funds was restored. The weight lifted from my shoulders, but the lesson I learned during that time stayed with me. True growth in a business doesn't come from stability, it comes from the ability to navigate chaos and adversity. Every problem is an opportunity disguised as a challenge. And by overcoming it, you emerge stronger and better prepared for what lies ahead. I was standing, looking out the window of my small improvised office, with a view of the city that never seemed to stop moving. There was a feeling in the air that everything was about to change. I had faced so much over the past few months, so many sleepless nights, so many uncertainties, so many times I thought I was losing control. I was exhausted, but the energy coming from within me now felt different. I knew I was close to something big. Sales were better than ever, and that was a solid victory. But there was still a lingering feeling that I wasn't doing enough. My business was growing steadily, and that was something to celebrate. Yet, deep down, I felt like what I had achieved so far wasn't enough. I wanted more, something beyond financial success, something that brought me true freedom. The turning point came when I realized I was trapped by my own success. It seemed contradictory, but it was true. I was so focused on scaling the business, on constant growth, that I had neglected one of the reasons I started this journey in the first place: freedom. I found myself stuck in a work routine that, while far more fulfilling than my previous job, was consuming me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I began to ask myself, what do I really want out of life? What I desired most was financial freedom, yes, but also the freedom to do things on my own terms, to live without constantly chasing numbers and new goals. It became clear to me that success alone wasn't enough. What I was missing was true freedom. It was around this time that an opportunity presented itself. A major investor, someone I never imagined would be interested in my small business, reached out to me. He wanted to know more about my vision, my product, and my business model. He believed there was something unique in what I was doing and wanted to be a part of it. He proposed a partnership, but, more importantly, offered something I had never expected: a chance to scale the business even further without sacrificing what had driven me to start it all, my freedom. For a moment, I was in shock. It was exactly what I wanted, but it also brought a new dilemma. I had always said I wanted freedom, but could I maintain my autonomy in a partnership with an investor? Could I grow without losing the essence of what I had built? I spent days thinking it over. At some point, I realized that the true test wasn't the partnership itself, but my ability to know what I truly wanted. I had already achieved so much, but this was the moment to take the next step. I understood that, to achieve true freedom, I needed more than just my own effort. I needed to trust others and leverage new resources. I was about to take a leap, not just to grow the business, but to achieve the kind of freedom I had always dreamed of. So, I made the decision. I would accept the proposal. The fear was still there, of course, but I realized that the fear of growing was the same fear that had once held me back from leaving my previous job. I had learned to face challenges before, and now, this new phase would be the ultimate test of everything I had accomplished. The deal was closed, and things began to move faster than I could have imagined. I had taken the leap. The partnership brought resources, but also gave me the ability to focus on what I truly loved, creating new solutions, driving innovation, enhancing the customer experience, and, most importantly, maintaining the freedom I valued so deeply. Freedom wasn't just about money or success. It was about choice. It was about deciding how, when, and where to work without being a prisoner of circumstances. It was about doing what I loved while achieving the balance with personal life that I had always desired. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: I had finally found the freedom I had been searching for. And more than that, I knew my entrepreneurial journey was far from over. It was only the beginning of a new phase, where fear and doubt were now a part of my past. If you resonated with this story, if you believe that true freedom comes from the courage to take the first step and learn from the challenges along the way, then don't miss a single chapter of this journey. Subscribe to the channel now and be part of a community of people who, just like you, are seeking inspiration to transform their lives and achieve success. Together, we will write a story of overcoming and achievement. Don't put off until tomorrow what you can conquer today. Click subscribe and come take the next step with us.